welcome to episode 300 and... No, that's all wrong. I've got it all wrong. I don't know where I am sometimes.
234.
234 of the old CRICKETher Weekly, brought to you live from the old city of Dublin. And a very fine city it is too. Raf, what are we enjoying this weekend in the old city of Dublin?
Are you going to keep that hat on for the entire...
No, I'm not. No.
Are you going to keep the accent?
I'm going to take it off very shortly. Yes.
Okay.
No, I'm going to take the accent off very shortly too.
Apologies to any Irish viewers we may have. Sid's displaying one of our bobble hats that we received from Cricket Island, and I must say that this has been one of the most fun weeks I've had covering cricket, because everyone at Cricket Island has been so welcoming.
Warm
it's
and
been
welcoming.
wonderful.
Yeah, the whole cliche is basically really completely true.
So I really do hope that Sid hasn't offended anybody. So we are in Dublin. We are between the two T20s. So when you're watching this, the second T20 might have happened, but we haven't watched it yet just because of recording times. So in last week's episode, we discussed the first ODI. We've since then had two more ODIs, which could not have been more different, Sid. In the first one, England recorded a record win against Ireland. Tammy Bowmont hit a 150. In the third ODI, which was admittedly shortened to 22 overs due to rain, Ireland beat England, the second time only that they've ever beaten England. So that was a bit odd because they were only 48 hours apart. And then in the first T20 on Saturday, yesterday, England won by quite a lot and were pretty dominant throughout. So let's deal with those second two ODIs first. Obviously, great week for Tammy Bowmont. Is she England's best ever ODI batter, Sid?
I think, well, we put it to her afterwards. We said, you've overtaken Charlotte Edwards now. Yeah. So, she's now got one more international century than Charlotte Edwards. But Tammy quite correctly pointed out, if Lottie had been playing, Lottie had played, the vast majority of her England games were played on club grounds, in a much different era. If Lottie had been playing today, she probably would have those more hundreds. So Tammy was quick to slap that down and say, no, I'm not a greater batter than Lottie. But she's had a very decent career now. And
I think what's really interesting about Tammy Bowmont is actually that she's kind of one of the first players in the professional era who's developing into a specialist in a particular format. She's so far and away above lots of other players in terms of her one-day batting, and yet she can't get into the England T20 team. Yeah, and people have talked for years about how professionalisation is going to lead to that specialisation, but we've very rarely seen it actually at international level. You still see almost identical 11s for the 50 and the 20 over formats, and tests as well when they come along. So actually that's quite an interesting thing. It's not something that Tammy would have wanted, because she obviously wants to be in the T20 team, but I'm just putting it out there that I think maybe she's one of the first professional specialists in women's cricket. Yeah,
it's just taken a little bit more time to get going, doesn't she? And I guess that England see you can't afford that time to get going in the T20 format, but in the one-day format you've got that little bit more time, and she in the one-day format is able to accelerate and still produce decent run rates at the end. But definitely at the moment, an absolutely key player for England in the one-day format, and one that will be vital to the next World Cup, which is coming up in a year's time.
Definitely.
I think she's going to add to that 100 again. She's going to start to pull away.
Without doubt, yeah. From a kind of England World Cup perspective, we had two of the players in England's World Cup squad over here in Ireland, Freya Kemp and Bess Heath. What did you kind of make of their performances over here in terms of then leading into the World Cup? Because they were both over here to sort of give them a bit of confidence and a bit of game time going into that tournament.
Yeah, and I think Freya Kemp got that with the bat, didn't she? She had a decent innings. She's kind of one of those explosive players that smashes out and will eventually get out. I thought there's an interesting contrast between the way that people are seeing the Freya Kemp innings the other day, where she gave it a huge whack and eventually got caught on the boundary, and the Bryony Smith innings, where she gave it a huge whack and eventually got caught on the boundary. The reaction to Bryony Smith is like, oh well, she's going to give it a whack. She gave it a whack, yeah, but she eventually got caught on the boundary. Whereas Freya Kemp, everyone's like, well, yeah, but she gave it a whack. I mean, yeah, she got caught on the boundary, but she gave it.
It's because people still see Kemp as a bowler who bats, whereas Bryony is a batter and she doesn't really bowl at international cricket. She does sometimes bowl in domestic cricket. So I think that's what's going on. But I don't know that is where Freya Kemp is going with her career, because her bowling, John Lewis sent her to Ireland to get some rhythm back. And she did bowl a bit and she took a few wickets, but she didn't look massively threatening. She still doesn't look anything like the bowler that she was before her back injury.
Yeah, and that's the key to it, isn't it? She's just not. If we're going to be bringing her back to bowling, we want to be bowling her through domestic cricket. I mean, This is not international class bowling, and I think that does remain an issue. And if they're expecting her to bowl a lot of overs in the World Cup, I suspect those overs are going to go for quite a lot of runs on what we saw, because she's not bowling at full pace. I mean, it's not terrible. She's not bowling a pile of wides or anything like that. But it's just not very threatening. Lauren Filer looked 10 times the bowler that Freya Kemp did.
She did. And actually, if you were making a decision on them purely on bowling right now, there's just
no question.
There's no question, is there? You'd have Lauren Filer in your World Cup squad. So it's pretty clear that John Lewis wants Kemp for her batting. We'll just have to kind of keep an eye out for how she evolves with that. From an Irish perspective, Sid, that ODI win, the first officially recognised win, Ireland against England in an ODI, because the ECB don't recognise the 2001 win as a full international. That's a different story for a different episode. What's that going to mean for Irish cricket? Because it was very exciting to be there and see that, wasn't it?
It was great, and it was great the way they came back. I think from the players' perspective, having had that huge hammering the day before, they came back and they really went for it. They'd been set a total. They were clearly well, we can either, we can knock it around and not get the runs, or we can have a go. And they had a go. It was a brave effort, led by Gabby Lewis, and it came off. In terms of on the cricket field, what it means is that that's going to happen occasionally. If they have that bravery to go for it, it will come off occasionally. It probably won't come off a lot, and they're going to lose a lot more games than they win. But it will mean some good, exciting wins. So that's positive. As for the sort of the wider reaction within Ireland, I think that Cricket Ireland were quite disappointed with the crowds over the 3 ODIs, and it doesn't look like they're particularly registered. We watched the news yesterday, and they didn't have anything about yesterday's game on the news.
Obviously, the 2 T20s are on free-to-air in Ireland, which is a very big deal. It's the first time Ireland women have been on free-to-air TV here. It's too early for us to have any viewing figures. So I think that is going to be potentially something to look out for. I just think that, we always say this is a young Ireland side. They've got 3 really excellent players. Obviously, Amy Hunter, Gabby Lewis, and Ola Prendergast, who's just head and shoulders above everyone else.
Ola Prendergast is really the outstanding player there. She's head and shoulder above. She's possibly already looking like the best player Ireland have ever produced. Sorry, Kim Garth, you're going to be overshadowed now.
But I think we've talked about Scotland, for example, who are a kind of comparable example, who are probably in a similar situation in terms of their 2 standout players are the Bryce sisters. Ireland have also got a couple of spin bowlers who are 18 years old. So Amy Maguire and Freya Sargent, who are both very, very much troubling the England batters actually, who are really sort of continuing this little bit of a theme of England batters just trying to hoik everything across the line and getting out basically.
I love the way Freya Sargent does a sort of little wind the bobble up thing. Just before she bowls, she almost comes in and is like, wind the bobble up.
So I'm just excited about what this Ireland team might achieve in a couple of years' time, given the right investment, which obviously Cricket Ireland do seem to be putting in now. And I think that win against England on Wednesday could one day be seen as the start of something, but you've obviously got to keep the investment going, otherwise England are just going to get further away from you, and other teams as well. And it is disappointing actually that they're not going to be in that World Cup next month, that there aren't a couple of extra spots for a couple of extra teams, because why should it come down to Ireland or Scotland being in the World Cup? That ideally they would both be there, right? Yeah. Let's talk about the first T20, Sid. We've switched formats. Bryony Smith was brilliant, wasn't she?
Yeah, it was a fantastic innings. Classic Bryony. She hits the ball harder than anyone else on the circuit. And, she did that. She told us afterwards she'd been disappointed not to have, been selected at all in the ODIs. Yeah. She obviously thought that she could have gone in and played better than Emma Lamb did. on the evidence yesterday, she probably could. But, you know, she came in, seized her chance, her hat's now in the ring. I suppose the real question is, what future does she have with England, though, you know, given like the queue of batters that...
And especially for that opening spot, because that's really a position that she does, right? And she's a bit less flexible than maybe some of the other batters in terms of like a Danny Wyatt, who has often batted at 6 or 7 and can do that slightly lower order role. So I think that's...
It's almost like she needs the new ball. Exactly, she needs to be in the power play.
Exactly.
Because with 4 out, she's going to get caught a lot quicker, basically. Because she's getting caught on the boundary almost every time.
So that's the issue for Bryony Smith specifically, is she really needs to have an opening position open up for her. Now, I mean, like, I guess you could say that the England openers in T20 haven't been nailed on, because we have had quite a lot of chopping and changing over the last 6 months. But obviously she's not in that World Cup squad, and whoever opens the batting for England out in the UAE may well kind of then solidify that spot alongside Danny Wyatt. The other thing that Bryony Smith has always struggled with is, I guess, consistency. If she was doing what she did against Ireland yesterday, even like every 3 or 4 matches, then surely she would be being selected by England, but she isn't, and it just feels like a little bit inconsistent. So that's what she really needs to work on. But I would love to see her. I would love to see her back in the England team regularly, because she's such a lovely person. And it was so nice to see her so excited at the end of play yesterday.
She was also quite excited about the Stars, wasn't she? I believe Rhiannon McDonald-Gay had been on the sidelines keeping her updated
about the progress.
The Stars game. So she's obviously really committed to the Stars in Surrey as well.
Absolutely. Just quickly, Seren Smale had a good match in the first T20 as well. She had 25 in 19 balls, and then very tidy and sharp behind the stumps.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there were a couple of errors that you can pull out, but you know, she looked a lot better than Bess Heath, honestly. And you know, if I was Bess Heath, I'd be breathing a big sigh of relief that the England squad for the World Cup has already been selected, and I'm not being compared here with Sara Smale, because Sara Smale came in and, you know, looked authoritative with the bat.
Yeah.
You know, Bess Heath did have, you know, a decent supporting role in the first match, with Kate Cross at the end. You know, she helped to get them over the line. You know, she did well, but Seren Smale, something about the way she played looked like this is a woman born to play for England.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know, her keeping really looked a lot more solid. And I might be changing horses here.
Whoa, Sid, whoa. In terms of what we're expecting to see today in the second T20, I will just say that I'm expecting to see Katie George, because she was called up this week, and Kate Cross essentially said on Friday in the pre-series pressers that she's kind of cover for Mahika Gore, who did bowl her full allocation yesterday. Great to see her coming back from injury, but they probably don't want her to play in back-to-back T20s, because it's quite a quick turnaround if you are coming back from injury. So be interesting to see how Katie George gets on, because again, it's all about these kind of returns, these players who first played for England in 2018 roughly, and are now kind of breaking their way back in and using this Ireland tour as that opportunity. So that will be very interesting to see.
The main thing I'm expecting to see today is rain. Unfortunately,
the forecast is improving for later. Anyway, let's talk about the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy semi-final. So you just mentioned Stars, who did in the end get over the line against Vipers, although it was touch and go for a while. We should say that because of following the England-Ireland T20, we were only really watching on the scorecard for most of the semi-finals. So it's a little bit like the olden days. Anyway, Stars did get across the line against Vipers. Well done to Alice Davidson-Richards. That may have been the most important innings of her career in a Stars shirt. Diamonds v Sunrisers as well. That one. It's a little bit touch and go for Sunrisers.
Yeah, again, following along on the scorecard, you know, Sunrisers made a decent start when they were bowling, and Diamonds looked like they weren't going to get very many runs, and then they came back, and then it looked like too many runs, and then Sunrisers came in, and Grace Scrivens got 50, and I was like, they could do this.
Yeah.
Then Grace Scrivens got out, and I was like, oh, there's still quite a lot of runs left, but Cordelia Griffiths, you know, got a load of runs, and then, but even when there was still like, so I was sitting next to Nathan Johns who's former journalist for the Irish Times, and he was like, they're going to do this, and I was like, ooh, you know, Sunriser's going to sunrise.
You were so nervous, weren't you? How pleased are you that they have had this kind of fairy tale and got to the final in the last ever?
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? And I think, you know, again, it's the Grace Scrivens effect. I don't think you can disconnect the fact that she's become captain, and then suddenly things have, you know,
it's
radically
amazing.
changed in terms of mindset.
Yeah.
You know, players that weren't able to apply themselves a year and a bit ago, like Cordelia Griffiths, that really struggled. She was always able to play the shots, but struggled to, turn that into big innings. Is now able to do that. That's leadership.
It's very striking, isn't it? In terms of Vipers, I'm sorry, Sid. I'm sorry that they aren't going to be in the final.
Well, at least I avoid the dilemma of do I support Sunrisers or Vipers in the final.
That's true, good point. There has been a little bit of chat on social media about the Charlotte Edwards effect, and has it run its course? Has it run out? Has it burned out? Because obviously this performance by Vipers, they haven't won a match since the 100. Southern Brave in the 100 had a very disappointing tournament. I'd like to address that because I think that's a bit unfair on Charlotte Edwards, actually. I think that, name me another coach, first of all, who's led her team to 5 titles in 5 years of regional cricket. That's a very amazing feat, even regardless of this latest poor run of form. And, in terms of kind of what's happened to Vipers, well, they've got a lot of players missing, either here in Ireland or in the World Cup squad. And what has Charlotte Edwards done to try and make up for that? She's actually signed Naomi Ditani on loan. And Naomi Ditani's just taken a fifer against the Sunrisers in one of the games. Okay, Vipers lost, but we don't see Naomi Ditani taking fifers very often. And I think that's kind of emblematic of what Lottie has done so well, which is pick players, bring them forward, give them the confidence to shine, develop players. We haven't seen coaches doing that since Mark Robinson was coaching England and did it for Tammy Bowmont and did it for Danny Wyatt. So I just think it's so premature and unfair to say, oh, Charlotte Edwards has lost her touch.
Yeah, and for instance, let's just take the case of Lindsay Smith, for example. Lindsay Smith was almost certainly signed by Charlotte Edwards to bring her to Vipers because she wasn't going to be playing for England, and therefore, she would be available for these matches.
Exactly.
And of course, she comes down. The Lottie touch. Her form has notched up again. Her fitness has notched up again. Her batting's notched up again. She gets selected by England again, and
so Freya Kemp as well was somebody that Lottie particularly selected and championed at Vipers. So she's almost become the victim of her own success, arguably. Now I know that we are a bit Vipers centric, Vipers biased sometimes, but I just think don't write Charlotte Edwards off. I think that she's still brilliant. She's still a brilliant coach. Let's do finals predictions then, Sid, because I know that your head and your heart have got a little bit of a conflict going on here. You obviously really want Scrivens to lead Sunrisers to the win against the Stars.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the fairy tale, wouldn't it? And I think it's definitely possible, absolutely, because the Stars have been a little bit brittle this season. But on the other hand, look, they've got Bryony coming back. They've got Paige Schofield coming back. They've got Rhiannon McDonald-Gay coming back. Yeah. I think that Stars are just going to be too strong for them. But, if Sunrisers can bat first and put runs on the board.
Isn't it? Because I think if Stars end up batting first, they could easily put 300 on the board, and then it's just at that point it's too much to chase in a final. It's too much pressure. So I think the toss could end up being quite key at Leicester next weekend.
We'll be at Leicester next weekend.
We will. Very exciting. Sid, we have had a little bit more news come out this week about what next year is going to look like, next season, the shape of it. The first thing I wanted to highlight is actually that the Tier 2 counties are going to compete in a Vitality Blast Women's League 2 underneath League 1 and a Metro Bank One Day Cup Women's League 2. So the second tier is exactly mirroring what's happening in the first tier. I think that's interesting. I wonder whether that does point to it being more likely for promotion and relegation to be on the cards in future, because if you've got the same kind of if you've got a bit of alignment between tiers 1 and 2 in 50 and 20 over cricket, then that maybe suggests that is going to be on the cards in a few years' time.
Yeah, I think promotion and relegation is still going to be very difficult, especially given the fact that you've got 2 separate competitions. And what do you do if a team gets promoted in the T20s and doesn't get promoted in the 50 overs? Yeah. And then how do you align that with the fact that Tier 1 is your fully professional tier, and Tier 2, realistically, in the next 4 or 5 years, is not going to turn fully professional. At the very least, it's going to have lower salaries and a more kind of part-time semi-professional ethos.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good point, actually, and it does point to one of the big dilemmas about the whole thing.
But I think the other thing to bear in mind is that if you're a fan of the men's game, the people in the men's game, the people that run the men's game will be keeping an eye on this. We've said it so many times before. If you want to see what's going to happen in the men's game, look at what's where we now are in the women's game. I think people in the men's game could be looking at this. Some people will be looking at it going, only having 8 teams in Division 1 of the Blast, that sounds like a good thing. And then all the top teams could play each other every time. Then we'd get bigger crowds for our games. So...
Interesting. We live in interesting times, Sid. The other bit of news or information that we've had is about where the finals for all of these different kind of competitions and trophies are going to be played. And there has been quite a lot of chat about this on social media. It doesn't seem to have gone down too well amongst supporters of women's cricket. So obviously the T20, the women's T20 finals day is going to be at the Oval. The Tier 2 finals day is going to be at Northants. I hope I've got this right. It's quite complicated. The One Day Cup final is going to be at Southampton. The One Day Cup for Tier 2 final is going to be at Worcestershire. And there is also this knockout cup, isn't there? So women's cricket's FA Cup, effectively, that's going to have teams in it from 1, 2 and 3. And that's going to be at Taunton. So what do all of those locations have in common, Sid?
Well, they're all kind of Midlands or South, but if you actually look at the 4 big competitions, this is something that Jack Rule pointed out on Twitter, the 4 big competitions, so you've got the 100, the Knockout Cup, the Division 1 T20, the Division 1 One Day, the furthest north final is Lords in London.
Very north, very north.
So, I think that does say something. Yes, there's Midlands venues for the 2 Tier 2 finals, but it does appear very South-centric, and I think that we probably could have done a bit better than this. One thing that I think that might longer term be a factor in this is, of course, the new Lancashire ground. So we know that Lancashire are developing a second ground, which is going to be used partly to host women's games. Is that going to be somewhere where it would be a great ground to host some of these finals in future with a sort of capacity of 4,000 or 5,000?
Because the issue that we have is that, for example, nobody wants to go to Scarborough for a women's finals day. It's very remote, it's very difficult to get to, and that's your kind of size of ground that you're looking at for some of these finals, right?
Yeah, exactly, because otherwise you're going to see a very empty Old Trafford or a very empty Headingley.
Yeah, exactly, and that doesn't feel great on the day. One of the things you've got to kind of account for is that the ECB have tried to have some of these women's things on a Sunday because and a lot of the men's things are on a Saturday. And that's because they think that maybe there might be some crossover in the fan bases, right, who might want to try and go to Saturday and Sunday. Now, that's interesting. I do think that there's a little bit of a dilemma here. It depends whether you think that women's cricket should develop its own distinctive fan base, or whether it should be playing off the same fan base as the men's, or just in terms of people who will actually turn up to watch it. If you think that it should be developing its own distinctive fan base, then you would say, okay, well, we'll have the women's stuff on Saturday because that's the best day, because then people can get home more easily and not have to worry about getting up early
much
for
better
work
public transport on Saturday,
day.
all that kind of stuff.
But on the other hand, if you don't want to clash, if you want to avoid clashes with the men's, then that is very difficult because, for example, men's test matches always go over a weekend, both days of a weekend. And that's like usually about 7 weekends in a summer. So if you account for that and you then account for the 100, you've got most weekends accounted for between June and September. So you have got a dilemma here, and the ECB can't magic up more weekends from nowhere. So you either have to accept that there's going to be a clash with men's cricket and we're going to have our stuff on Saturdays, which I think is probably my preference, because I think we should be developing our own distinctive fan base. Or you go, okay, well, we're going to divvy up the Saturdays and Sundays between men's and women's cricket. That would be probably fairer. So some men's stuff will be on a Saturday, some women's stuff will be on a Sunday, and vice versa. But you can't attack the ECB from both of those perspectives. Okay, it's either that there's going to be a clash and you accept that, or that some women's stuff will happen on Sundays. But the geographical argument I do accept is a legitimate one. But I feel like a little bit that the ECB with this schedule is damned if they do and damned if they don't. That's my kind of 2 pennies worth. Shall we wrap up there?
€2 worth, sorry, Raf.
€2 worth, thanks. So next week we will have seen the last ever Rachel Hay-Ho Flint Trophy final. And we're going to be reflecting a bit on regional cricket, aren't we, Sid? We're going to do a wrap up. What are the legacies of regional cricket? Good, not so good. So we'd love to hear your views on that. If there's anything you want us to talk about specifically, or any comments, any feelings that you have about regional cricket and what it's achieved and what it maybe hasn't achieved, we'd love to hear them. Drop us a note below the line or on Twitter, and we will read out some of your comments. Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and we'll see you in a week. Bye.
Bye.